But really, if you break it down step by step, where you go, what are my tentpole events? Let me write them on this calendar. What kind of sales promo could I do from there? Let me write this on the calendar. Where do I see any gaps in this timeline? Let me fill it with something, some kind of nurturing, whether that's emails or an event or a live stream. Let me put it in there. If you take it step by step by step like that, and again, if you give yourself the time, a week or 2 weeks to do this, what you're going to see is, wow, I actually have a fully formed plan for what next year is going to look like. And then the next step is just breaking down and like in Asana or whatever you're using, giving yourself steps to say, okay, this week I'm doing this, then I'm doing that. And it compiles very quickly if you think about it step by step by step.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. This is episode 197. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. With me is my awesome co-host, Mr. Ed Isola. Ed, what's going on, dude?
I am having a great day, and I'm ready for everybody that's listening to prepare to have a great year, which is what this podcast episode is going to be about.
Heck yeah, man. I hope you're all digested from Thanksgiving. And I know the 502's Black Friday sale has been crushing it, so that's pretty exciting. But yeah, I'm super pumped to talk about this too, man. Last week we talked all about how to keep your fans excited as you go into the holidays. But kind of to follow that up, I wanted to talk about how do we keep ourselves excited as artists around the holidays, and how do we use that sort of excitement as a springboard to plan into the new year. So I'm really pumped to talk about this.
Same, man. And it's really exciting because, like, you know, last week we were talking about, here is how you kind of fill the void, you know, whatever you want to call it, in December, which was kind of a down period.
Yeah, the slowdown.
Right, the slowdown. Here's how you make sure you don't overly slow down in December. That's what last week was about. I feel like everybody has this kind of mental, whatever you want to call it, reawakening that, like, when January 1st hits, it's like, boom, we're going, right? Like, the new year started. I want to be my best self. I'm going to dedicate myself to this. Or I'm going to dedicate myself to that. Like, I'm going to be sticking to my schedule, my workouts, my creative processes, whatever it is. Everybody kind of views January 1st as this fresh start. And so this is going to be a really great dive and hopefully give you guys some pointers into how do you start the year off on, one, the right foot, and then two, how do you make sure you're kind of trying to attack the right objectives, right? You want to have some goals in mind, but you want to also be making sure it's like the right thing, not like, hey, I'm going to go try to run Spotify traffic to red light countries.
That was just a nice little dig that you put in there. I like that. But yeah, dude, I totally agree. I think it's tempting to fall into the slowdown of the holiday season, and then, you know, January 1st rolls around and it's like, okay, now I have to make my resolutions for my music career, when really, like, this time period is a great time to start planning out what you want the new year to look like for you, to get ahead of it. That way you can really hit the ground running with a solid plan and a strategy and really goals outlined based on what your needs are. So I'm really excited to talk about this. I love this time of year for doing exactly this, like doing, you know, beginning of year planning, wrap up planning of the year, and really trying to charge forward into a new year. I think that's just good business practice. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, agreed. And I actually have time set aside later this week to do this myself. So it's very good timing for me to kind of talk about it and think through what I'm going to do, what my process is going to be, because, you know, you're at this point, we're about 4 to 5 weeks out from the new year. And it's a great time to do it. You don't have to be doing this 3 months in advance. You can set your goals and objectives a month out and then start planning how you're going to attack it. But I think a good starting place, and we kind of touched on this a little bit before we jumped on, but I think a good starting place is to know where you're going to go. You kind of have to know where you've been. And that's a great place to start. And I wanted to kind of dive in with you there about what kind of stuff should you be looking for in your audience over the past 3 or 6 months, or even 12 months, to kind of inform what your next year goal should look like.
Yeah, you know what's really fun about this is the first episode that you were like officially co-hosting, that we were doing the show together, we talked about building a roadmap for your music marketing. And we specifically talked about, looking at your audiences and letting that kind of inform what your roadmap and your strategy is going to be. And so much of that process really comes into play right here as you're planning into a new year. If you don't already have plans for the next quarter or the next 6 months or the next year, that's a really great place to start, is auditing your fan base and seeing where things are at. So, you could be looking at how your audience has grown over the last 6 to 12 months and what you've done in that time period to make that growth happen. And that will then inform, okay, what's my next step here? So following that audit process that we covered in that episode is a really great place to start. I'll make sure we link to that in the show notes so that you guys can go back and listen to it. It's crazy because it feels like that was a second ago that we recorded it, but it's back in the summertime now. But I think, generally speaking, the stuff that you should be looking at is looking across the buddy system and looking to see where fans are hanging out in each stage of the customer journey for your business. What is the size of your listener pool? People that are just hanging out in your world but aren't customers. What's your subscriber list looking like for email, for text? What's your customer list looking like? How has that grown? And more specifically, as you kind of dig into it, how many people are first-time customers and how many people are repeat customers? Do you have people who are in the ascended sort of membership recurring customer stage as well? That's something to look at. And how many people are in sort of the referral advocacy stage as well? Looking at all of those areas for growth patterns, what's been happening and what you've done, in the past year to move people through those stages, I think allows you kind of like a graph of, okay, this is what I've got. Like this is what's taking stock of everything that you've got in your ecosystem. And that will kind of give you the roadmap again of what you can be doing in the new year.
Yeah. And I always think about it, we're kind of talking about top of funnel listeners, permission subscribers, and then affirmation and ascension, your customers and repeat customers. And I feel like a good way for me to visualize this is, one, like Jack said, we've kind of covered, here's how you do the audit in a past episode that we'll link to, but it's here's how you actually audit and see what numbers, what your metrics look like. That's a great starting point. So this is a good time to do an end of year audit and get your numbers. But then like what Jack's building off of here is saying, okay, you have this audit. Here's how you take that and kind of focus it for 2022 or for the next year. And I always visualize this a little bit almost like a bar graph, where if you have your 4 numbers for those 4 categories, they're probably not all the same height, right? You might have more top of funnel, you might have lower subscribers. I think that that's a great way to kind of pick your first objective for the new year, is to look. And again, if you're looking at listeners, subscribers, customers, repeat customers, do you have a huge audience of listeners? If so, you're probably cleared to move on to subscribers. If you have a huge list of subscribers, you probably can move on and put your first attention on making those subscribers customers. So you kind of work left to right almost on this graph, and based off of if you have enough in step 1, you can proceed to step 2. I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that kind of visualization really helps, because just having numbers in front of you, as important as it is to know your numbers, it's also just as important to know what to do with those. And I think that's kind of at the heart of what we're getting into in this episode is a lot of what we do at the agency, for example, with the artists that we work with at IndieX, is looking to see like, okay, what kind of growth have we driven through marketing campaigns, through any of our efforts, really, through releases, through marketing campaigns, through album launches, through fan finders, through opt-in campaigns, through sales promos, any of that. What kind of movement has that created, from the last time that we audited things? And like I've said on, probably countless episodes in this show before, is like, we do this process fairly regularly, quarterly, and, if not every, twice a year. And the end of the year is a really great time to do it because it allows you to plan out what's going to come next. So where I think this comes into play is it allows you to then look and see, here's my growth patterns in terms of my fan base. And you can use those that then inform, what the goals are for your next album launch or EP launch. Maybe it is focused more on like, I just need more awareness. Like I've got a diehard group of people that are supporting me, but it kind of dries up. So I need to focus on really in this next EP launch, I need to really focus on getting my music in front of new people. So, you'd be working a top of funnel, cold traffic sort of region. Maybe you're seeing that you've got a lot of first time customers and people haven't bought from you again. And so then you look at your merch strategy and you're like, oh man, I haven't put together any new merch. I haven't created any new sales offers in quite a long time. So I need to make sure that I slate this for, my new year marketing calendar. And that's kind of where I wanted to go next, was like doing this process of auditing and looking at your fan base then will allow you to build out a sales promotional calendar and really identify what the goal of each of the promotions in it will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And right before we dive into that, I think a really good thought that I just had was like, if this is not your first time doing an audit or, kind of taking stock of where you are, like Jack was kind of just saying, you should look at what your processes have been in the past, and you should look for what worked, but you should also look for what didn't work, because as you plan the upcoming year, you don't want to be repeating things that didn't work for you. So I think that's just like a good thing to keep in mind, that, if you're going back and you're looking through the year, keep in mind, like, it's okay to acknowledge that, some things didn't work. That doesn't mean that you were a failure. It means that you probably shouldn't do them again, and then just maximize the things that did work.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Running like a retrospective like that, not just when you're auditing your fan base, but also looking back on all of the initiatives that you've undergone in the last year, that definitely gives you insight into like, what are the things that got me to where I am? Because I think that's a trap that a lot of artists fall into, is when stuff is working well, I think there's some sort of a natural inclination to want to just throw a wrench in it and do something totally different. And, some people say like, oh, I want to rebrand, or I want to change the way that I word my emails, or I'm going to change the way that my copy is written, or I'm not going to make videos that look like this, or I'm going to change my sound and totally overhaul. And while I think there's value, or there can be value in all of that, it's very easy to lose sight of what has gotten you to the place that you are. And I think that that's kind of a cautionary tale. I've certainly seen that working with artists where, they want to change things up and shake it up a little bit, and they forget what made them have the success that they've had. So I think having that sort of retro look on things, both to see what's been working and really take it to heart and be like, this worked for me, and my fans like it, and I like it, and it feels good, so I'm going to keep doing it, versus, okay, this could have been a little bit better, or this totally fell on its face.
Yeah, it's just stick to the fundamentals that work for you, and I've seen a lot of success with that personally for the 502s. We figured out, here's what our, not our brand, I guess, but here's what's at the core of what we do. Here's what we like to do, and here's what our fans like. They like live performance videos. They like our recordings. They like behind the scenes access. If you kind of boil down what we're doing, those are the three things that, in my head, I'm just like, do not abandon those three things. You can be creative with them. You can do whatever you want. You can try other things to see if you can add to it, but stick to what you know works. So there will be some testing, but something to keep in mind as you're doing the auditing. But once you've kind of done your audit and you've got your numbers and you've got, what worked and what didn't work, that's when it's a really good time to turn your sights to the upcoming year. And just as maybe like a helpful tip, I generally split this process into like multiple days. This isn't something where I sit down and try to do it in an hour. It's like I will do part one, which is let me take a look at just my metrics from the past year, right? And then the next day, let me dive into what I thought worked, what didn't work as part two. So that's 2 days of me kind of like taking a survey of the past year. And then I start to look forward and start planning, because like you'll get burned out. You'll kind of, go 50% in trying to plan your year if you try to do it all at once. And you never want that to happen, right? You want your plan for 2022 to be like, this is solid. I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing it. And I'm, most importantly, excited about doing it.
I think that's a really great point. And I love the sort of 3-stage or 3-pronged approach with auditing first, and then doing a retro on marketing and campaigns that you've run, and then doing planning. I think that you hit the nail on the head, dude. After doing auditing and retro or postmortems, I say postmortems because if you've been running promotions and you've run, postmortems that you've then stored, a lot of your retro work will probably be poring over those documents and really looking at historical data on that. That can tire you out. And, if some things didn't go well, your creativity might just be zapped from a day of doing that. So you do need to give yourself the space to sit back with the data and not try to knock this all out in one day. I think that's a really, really good point. It will stop you from getting overwhelmed.
Yeah. And then if you get overwhelmed, you quit, and then you're pretty much back at square one for not having a plan for the next year. But all kind of cautionary, practical tips of advice aside, where would you say, okay, they've done the 3 steps there. Where would you say, here's how you start?
Well, speaking of not getting overwhelmed, I want to touch on this and then get into my thoughts on what you were saying. Is I think after auditing and seeing like the areas of opportunity in your ecosystem, in your fan base, and knowing some idea of what you might want to be doing or what you might be excited about. Maybe you've got a record that you've been working on and you're just needing to figure out like how to launch it. I think it's really easy to get overwhelmed with like trying to plan out a whole year. So my cautionary point here is you don't necessarily need to plan out a whole year's worth of activities in this session either. But the place that I would start is by starting to build a sales promotional calendar or a promotional calendar in general. It doesn't necessarily just have to be sales, based on the things that you're seeing. So I would have a monthly sort of promotion that you're looking to do. If you're in the stage where you've got customers or you're ready to start generating customers or you're going to be ascending customers, ideally, having a marketing campaign, a sales promotion campaign slated for each month is a really great place to start. And knowing the why behind each of those. And like I said, you don't need to do this for the whole year before it's even January. You could just plan out the first quarter. But I think that's where I would start. Typically after I do, after I run an audit, say for a client at IndieX, I might have a general sense of what they're going to be working on, whether it be a new record or a stream of new singles, or I might know that they've got, some videos planned. But oftentimes the dates of those aren't hard and set in stone yet. So where I often like to start is like, okay, for this specific artist, for this fan base, here are some promotions that I might slate from January through April, sales promotions, and the offers that I might run with them. But before I even think about that, I'm looking to see, what am I trying to do with these? Is the goal to just increase awareness? Is it to move subscribers into customers, so bridge permission to affirmation, the stages of the buddy system? Is it to encourage repeat purchases, so trying to ascend people and get them to buy again? Or is it just to generate revenue, which can then have multiple sort of angles of the promotion and what it might do? Those are kind of like the 3 to 4 sort of goals that I'm thinking of when I'm putting a promotional calendar together. And then based on those goals, that's how I slate promotions into a month. We go over all of this, by the way. That probably sounds really overwhelming. There's a whole training inside of Indie Pro on running sales promotions and generating sales all year round. And we go over that whole process. So if you want to check that out, you can check it out in Indie Pro. We'll leave a link to the training in the show notes. But that's kind of a general sort of rundown of what I would look at.
Yeah, and that's like perfect advice. Again, Jack's always giving the perfect advice.
That is far too kind.
It's the truth. But, I typically start in the same spot where I guess maybe one step I would take before that, if you do have an idea of like even loosely your releases for the year, put those on the calendar, right? So like for myself, I'm thinking, okay, we have a little EP to put out in March or April-ish. We've got something like a live album probably coming in like the last quarter of 2022. And that's not like I just said March 15th and November 4th, right? I'm just saying like somewhere in there, these things are probably going to happen, and we'll probably be doing a little bit of touring in the summer. That's enough to kind of say there's some goals, there's like some benchmarks of things that I want to build around. And I think getting those, I don't know if you want to call them anchors or whatever.
Tentpole events, yeah.
Right. Getting those tentpole events in there, that allows you to maybe just give a little bit more structure to then slot it in sales promos. But like those two things, put a couple tent poles in there and then start putting sales promos together. That's pretty much where I'm starting. Like for myself, it's like, okay, look, if we got something in March, we'll probably want to make an offer around that. You know, what does that offer look like? I think your advice of doing like the first quarter, right? Or the first half of the year, however you want to split it up. I think that's really great advice, because if you try to plan out a year, you're going to get overwhelmed. Also, things are going to change. And like as you make sales promos, certain items will sell, certain items won't sell. So then you're going to be switching everything up. So I think if you try to do it 3 months out and then, you know, wait till February and then do the next 3 months, you'll see better success with actually sticking with it. But in terms of an execution, I would pretty much do exactly what Jack said. You know, put a couple tent poles in there, put some sales promos in place around where you might want to run it, and then just start building around what those events are going to be. For me, I kind of will go to the tentpole event and then work backward or work to either side of it, right? So if we have a release in March, from there, I would kind of say, okay, well, we're going to do a pre-sale for it that probably spans into the start of February, and then a live post-sale that probably spans into April, give or take. So you're kind of going to the tentpole event and going both directions in the timeline as far as you feel appropriate. And then once you have that in place, you can kind of work your way back and say, well, if this promo is going from late February to early April, I should do something in like late January, right? So I think that's helpful for me, is get the tent poles in there, get the sales promos in there, build out from there. And then the last piece I would add is once you have those pieces structured for the first quarter, then you start slotting in your nurturing. And you say, okay, well, if I'm doing a sales promo in January and I'm doing one in March, something needs to happen in February that gives people value. And, you know, it touches on the same ideas as last week. How do you keep people engaged? You can't just be taking. You have to build the goodwill. And that's a good way to kind of think about it and to intentionally slot, like, okay, in February, in this instance, I'm doing a live stream for free. Or something we actually did last year was we sent personalized Valentines to everybody. Easy. But like we did little video Valentines, and you want to just kind of start planning out that way, I think. And I know that sounds like a lot, but really if you break it down step by step, where you go, what are my tentpole events? Let me write them on this calendar. What kind of sales promo could I do from there? Let me write this on the calendar. Where do I see any gaps in this timeline? Let me fill it with something, some kind of nurturing, whether that's emails or an event or a live stream. Let me put it in there. If you take it step by step like that, and again, if you give yourself the time, a week or 2 weeks to do this, what you're going to see is, wow, I actually have a fully formed plan for what next year is going to look like. And then the next step is just breaking down and like in Asana or whatever you're using, giving yourself steps to say, okay, this week I'm doing this, then I'm doing that. And it compiles very quickly if you think about it step by step.
I think that we're kind of unpacking a running sort of thread throughout what both of us are saying here. And that is about reverse engineering, right? Looking at the very highest level of what's happening in my music business, and then going down a level and being like, what are the big things, the big umbrella sort of tentpole events that are going to be happening this year? And then stepping down another level and saying, in between those, or alongside those, or as a part of those, what are the things that I need to do? And then stepping down another level with all of those campaigns that then surround that, what are the individual tasks that I need to do? And I think all of that is really important. And you don't have to plan down to the task as you're going into the new year, but like getting 3 or so levels down will really give you a framework to then start slating what it is you need to be doing and when you need to be doing it by. And we talked to Jonah about this, Dukes, who was on the podcast when we talked about Scrum and workflow. And I'll make sure to link to that in the show notes as well, just so that you can catch back up on the processes that we use here at Entrepreneur. But I think something that is just kind of critical in this is something that we see often at the agency when it comes to record releases, when it comes to product launches, when it comes to really any kind of marketing initiative. Something that a lot of artists fall into a trap is that they get overwhelmed and they can't get everything done. And 9 times out of 10, I would say, it usually comes down to not planning out down to the level that you need to in enough time in advance. So, then you're working at the last minute trying to get a music video shipped or running an awareness campaign for an album launch that's happening next week when really, the single should have had traffic being run on it 2 months ago. This kind of reverse engineering really works to solve that sort of problem.
Right. And I think that's like, if there's a key takeaway so far from what we've talked about, it's trying to reduce that stress and that last minute feeling of like, oh my God, like, how do I have 7,000 things to do? And they're all falling on my shoulders at the same time. This kind of pre-planning for the year in late November, early December, that will hopefully take that away from you and allow you to kind of be more creative and be more engaging with your fans. So instead of scrambling to do a sales page the night before, you can be on Facebook Live teasing that you have something coming out, right? And obviously it doesn't always go to plan like that, but that's really something that's important to take away here is like planning and doing it in an iterative process where, again, you're doing this audit over several days. You're doing your planning over a couple of weeks. It's not meant to be, this is, at least for me, it's not meant to be something where you sit down, it's done in an hour and you move on, right? Like you're planning 3 months worth of events out. Wedding planners don't do it in a day.
That's a really good analogy, actually, and a solid comparison. Like wedding planners don't do it in a day. In fact, like it's stressful as hell and it takes place over months and months and months. So yeah, I think that's a great point. And this has just been a really interesting topic to get into. And I think that's because it's a little different from, our usual kind of tactical approach to music marketing online and getting into advertising and what's working right now and how to really get the most juice out of your email marketing and texting. This is really more about business strategy and how to prepare yourself than it is about like one tactic or one strategy that you might use. I think when you apply kind of future pacing for yourself like this, it reduces a lot of stress. It's something that I encourage a lot of our clients at the agency to sort of undertake with the rest of their team. Certainly we're doing a lot of the buddy system auditing and the marketing planning, but with a lot of people and a lot of artists, there's a lot of moving parts. You might not just be a one-man show or a one-woman show. So involving your team in this is another part of that planning process. I'm curious how you guys handle that, Ed, with the 502s, just internally as a unit.
Yeah, well, we've been kind of listened to Jonah's and yours podcast episode around Asana sprint planning, and we've kind of gone that route, and it's been super, super effective. But we pretty much do, there's 5 of us working on stuff inside the band, and we pretty much do exactly what we just outlined, where myself and a couple of the other guys, we will get together. We're doing it this week. And we'll say, what are our goals for 2022? What are we doing? And I kind of just walked you guys through my thought process around here's our tentpole events for releases. And here's how we probably would run sales promos. But it's really just step by step. And I definitely get overwhelmed sometimes thinking about like, oh my gosh, right? Like things are going well and they need to keep going well. And I need to get all these things in place so that everybody's happy. And then I'm like, okay, why don't I just make a task for myself in Asana that says, set aside 2 hours to actually write down what you're thinking about, what you're concerned about, and go from there. And I always find writing it down is helpful. But in terms of how we plan, it's exactly what we've touched on today. Get the ideas down. Once you have that down, once you have your timeline down, once you know what's working, what's not working, then just start breaking it out and start tasking it out to people. And when you think about it that way, step by step again, it's easy to have 5 people doing it because it's like, okay, well, now that we're pretty clear on, release in March, what do we need to do? Okay, go write the emails, go do the ads, you go record the drum parts. It's like pretty straightforward. So I think the biggest, trickiest part is it can be kind of a cluster if we think about it as like fire in the room or whatever, chickens with your head cut off, then you don't know where to start. But if you actually just take a second, sit down, even if that's the only thing you accomplish that week is writing down what you need to do and organizing it, that's a huge step in planning the year.
That's a really good point. I'm curious just to go a step further with that is like when working with a team, How do you navigate the personalities when it comes to the planning? With lots of people, there are a lot of ideas going on. The first thing that comes to my mind is like, we've got the data in front of us. So you've done the auditing and you've done like the retrospectives to know factually what has been happening. But how do you navigate some of those more difficult conversations of like, this is the direction I want to go with our music or with our business versus, the direction that you want to go or your guitar player wants to go or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I mean, we are fortunate, and there's probably more of an answer to this question that you're probably getting at. And everybody within the 502s really is just like seeing what digital marketing can do and accomplish. So everybody's on board. Now, that actually is a good distinguishing point though, because I will typically take it upon myself with Joe. Joe is one of the techs at IndieX with Jack and I, who's also in the 502s, but we'll take it upon ourselves to kind of do the audit portion. And so we'll do that audit portion because we're super familiar with it. And we'll do the retrospective because, we're doing it every day for IndieX clients and it's easier for us to do. So we kind of take those first two steps on our shoulders, and then we'll jot down, here's what we think would be good to do. And then once we kind of have a loose guideline of like, here's our thoughts, we'll bring the other guys in, and that's where we're kind of like having open conversations around, well, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And once we get to that point, it's like, okay, well, if you don't like that, why don't you like it? And let's figure out a way to make sure everybody's happy, right? Like, we're all pretty easygoing personalities, but everybody doesn't always agree on everything. But I think it's super important to, one, come into that conversation having a couple people that have already done the legwork maybe and are aware of what you're dealing with so that you can offer ideas, because it's not a realistic expectation in my mind to say like, okay, you've never done this digital marketing stuff before, you should go do this audit, right? It's like, we can give you the information, we can lay it out, but then let's have a conversation around whether or not you agree with this. But it's really important to me to have everybody bought in on what we're doing. So it's never like hey, we're doing this, right? It's like everybody's got to be on board with it. And if not, we'll tweak an idea until everybody's on board. If I start off with idea A, we may not keep it, but we might just tweak it so that it's a cousin of what the idea once was, so to speak.
That's cool. And I think that's a great point. It kind of adds a fourth level to your sort of 3-stage process of auditing, retrospective, and planning. Between retrospective and planning, you've kind of got this outlining stage that's like, we're going to bring some initial ideas to the table, or we're going to present the data. Everyone's going to come to the table with ideas, and then we're going to plan and negotiate together. I think that's important for teams of any size, whether it's you and your manager that you're working with, or you and your management and your band members, or you and your marketing team, or your label team, or whatever it might be. Having that kind of data put in front of you, that's really where the power of like, talk about digital marketing, like that's really where the power of this comes into play, is like, we've got the data to know what's working, what's not, what's happening, what isn't. And then everybody can take that data and put some ideas down on paper and really be like, okay, based on what I know and what I think, this is the direction that I would want to go. And you can find meaningful compromises there.
Yeah. And honestly, I feel like that's almost like the more collaborative you can be with it, it's something that kind of, I think, elevates any idea that I have or Joe has or, anybody has. Typically we'll bring it in. It's like, okay, well, here's a perspective I didn't consider, and now it just made this idea 20 times better. That collaboration, I think, is really important. And it's also something that you kind of have to learn. If you're listening to this, you're probably the person in your band who is even considering 2022 planning, right? Like if you're listening to this, the weight of planning the next year is probably on your shoulders. And that can be a little bit stressful.
Yeah, you're the guy or the gal,
Right. So you're the person that probably should do step 1 and step 2. And that's not a bad thing. I think it can be a good thing. But I think if you haven't done it, this is something I've had to learn. You have to learn how to collaborate with people, and you have to learn how to say, okay, guess what? I'm in the weeds. I'm doing the digital marketing stuff. I know this, but where you can elevate yourself and your band and your plan for the next year is to say, okay, I know this so well that I'm going to take any ideas that everybody else has. I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to talk through them, and I'm going to figure out how that fits into a digital marketing framework. And then we're going to go deploy that. That's what really, I think, has been some of our biggest wins in the 502s have been ideas that were not digital marketing specific, but that we're like, wow, okay, that's a pretty crazy idea, but here's how we're going to fit it in to digital marketing so that we are getting the emails, or we are, retaining the information, or tracking the sales, and like keeping things actionable.
That's so good. That's so damn good. I don't think we could leave off on a better note. That's fire.
There you go. From my very own mind.
This is such a good time to get into planning. We've got a few weeks left of 2021. We're going into an exciting new year. I hope you guys take this and start planning out what you want 2022 to look like based on the data that you've got. So get into it. We'll see you guys next week on Creative Juice. Peace out, Indies.
Can y'all really feel me? East Coast, feel us, West Coast, feel me. Say what?